Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ann Dord, and I'm the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Medicine at Memorial University. On behalf of the faculty at Memorial University, I would like to welcome Dr. Jen Polk and thank her for joining us today as part of our Visiting Speaker Series. We gratefully acknowledge the funding support for the Visiting Speaker Program from the Faculty of Medicine, and this is what makes today possible. And I thank the audience for joining us today, taking time, and we're hoping to have over 60 students, faculty, and staff on the call. Thanks to technology, we are present virtually here together from different places and spaces and time zones. I would like to begin our presentation with the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement for the St. John's campus of Memorial University. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Inutunukuit, and the Innu of Nitassinan, and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. Now, I would like to give a special welcome to Dr. Jennifer Polk, PhD, a career coach and expert on PhD careers. She launched From PhD to Life as a career coach and speaking to businesses and students in 2013. So Jen writes on graduate education and careers for doctoral degree holders, but her advice has really good value for all students undertaking graduate studies. Jen's a guest speaker on university campuses and at academic and professional conferences throughout North America and beyond. Her University Affairs blog is a 3-time gold winner for the Canadian Online Publishing Awards. Congratulations. And just of interest, Jen has earned her PhD in history from the University of Toronto. You can follow Jen on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at PhD to Life. I'm pretty excited to welcome her today for her talk, From Graduate School to What to Do Now to Get Set for What's Next.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm coming from the city of Toronto today. So let me acknowledge that I work on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And thank you all very much for being here. Let me bring up my slide deck, share that, and let me turn on the captions as well, just in case that might be helpful to some of you folks. So it'll make the images themselves a little smaller. Okay, that didn't work with anything, did it? Right, so that's my first slide. So let me read out what it says on the screen here. From graduate education to question mark, what to do now to get set for what's next. So as Dr. Dorward said, so that's the title. I'm Jen. This is me. I haven't gotten a haircut in a year, so that's an old headshot. You all know what I look like now. And I did my PhD at U of T in Toronto. And yes, of course, as you just heard, that's where I live now. And also, as was mentioned, you can learn lots more about me on my website, fromphd-to-life.com. That's all spelled out in one word, From PhD to Life. And my main social media is Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, I'll see you there. Okay, and I'd love to hear from you folks. This is your turn to type in the chat if you like. And I have a question for you all that are attending live. Why are you here, right? What's important to you about being here? So why are you here? What's important to you? Anything like that. I'll give a minute to let you type in the chat if there's anything you want to share about why you're joining today. And for anyone watching this, if I look over there, it's because I'm looking at the chat. Any answers? Aha, I identify very strongly with the question mark in the title. Okay, great. Yeah, lots of questions. I follow you on Twitter. Yes, shout out to Twitter. Love to hear your perspective on life after grad school. I'm looking for options for careers post-PhD. Great, awesome. Figure out potential alternatives to academia since the job market is not amazing. and I better prepare myself. Okay, cool. Gain insight into what comes after grad school. Um, Terrified of graduating during a pandemic. Lots of question marks. How to make the most out of grad school to eventually have some sort of career? Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great reason to be here. These are all great reasons. Learn how to best market my skills. Thinking about what happens after a PhD can be scary. So looking for ideas and insights. I've spent my whole life in grad school, and the question marks sums up what I know about what comes next very well. Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that, folks. So in this presentation, I am going to focus on primarily what you're going to do now to get set for all of the many different variations of what can come next. But hopefully we'll have more time. And of course, I'm always available. Well, not 24/7, but I'm often available online to answer any more questions. And I do have a slide much later in the presentation, but I know that, your folks on campus, your supervisors, other folks at Memorial, there are places and people that you can have these conversations with as well. And I'll talk lots more about where else you can have those conversations. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for participating. That's great. So what are we going to talk about today? So this is the slide that has the agenda for us. So what we'll cover in this presentation. I'll start with what graduate degree holders want. That's first. Next, how to look for jobs. So the worse and the better approaches to that, how to look for jobs. And then I'll break down a 3-step process for getting set now for what's next. And really simply put, it's step 1 is focus on yourself. Step 2, identify possibilities. And step 3, market yourself to employers. Okay, and I'll explain all of that. And that section, that big section will be the bulk of the presentation. And then finally, you'll have an opportunity to do some thinking about what you personally are going to do to move yourself forward. And please, I will see the chat, and the host, please just interrupt me as I as I get into it and don't notice if there's anything, you need clarification on or anything comes up. I'm happy to answer questions to clarify things along the way. You can tell already I'm super casual. Okay, so next slide. This one says, what grads really want from jobs and careers? So, right, what do people want? And it's pretty reasonable. And so when I ask grad students and job seekers with advanced degrees, PhDs, not only PhDs, when I ask them, what do you want beyond just a decent job? They tell me lots of things. And, over the years, I've come to group all of those things into 8 categories. And so I'm going to go through them one at a time. And on the next 8 slides, right, 8 slides, 8 different things. But I'll go through it relatively quickly. And then on the 9th slide, I'll have all of them together so you can have an overview of all of them together. Okay, so don't need to scribble furiously through all of this. So the first thing, and as the illustration says, I'm looking for a job or at least career stability and security, right? I'm looking for job security, stability. So it's the kind of thing where, I don't want to keep applying for my job every 4 months, for example, right? So some people are really happy to work in the gig economy, and others, right, they want to have a sense that if not a permanent job, that they're on a track that leads to some sort of sense of, some security. So I hear that a lot. The second thing, and as this character says, I'd like to earn enough money to live a good life for me and my family. Yeah, right. So money does matter, right? Money does matter. I think especially if you come out of grad school where you might not have the most amazing funding package in the world. That's just the nature of grad school. This is a picture I took many years ago in PEI. So that's Xena, the dog. The third thing, and as it says on this one, I want to live where I want to live. And anyone know where I took that picture? Probably recognize that somewhere in your city. So, right, often people, they have a sense that to have a career in academia, for example, you might have to go anywhere, but it doesn't necessarily work that. There's work like that in other sectors. There's lots of possibilities for you to work where you want to live. Great. Fourth, I want to be passionate about my work or believe in its purpose. So I hear that a lot. I want to have a real passion for my work. I want my work to have purpose. That's very important. I think lots of us can relate to that. Next one. I want to have a positive impact on the world around me. Yeah, this one I hear a ton as well. And I want to have too, right? I do want to do work that has some impact. There's lots of different ways of defining this, but certainly work that has impact. Fantastic. Getting towards the end here. So this person is saying, I most enjoy working in supportive teams and collaborating with others, right? So it's interesting. It's one that I didn't necessarily expect, but I hear a lot of it. I really want to work in teams, or I want to have better collaborations with folks. So yeah, I think it makes the cut. And I want to be happy at work and know that I'm valued. Right. So sometimes in academia, it can be kind of isolating, or there's maybe not a lot of positive, rewarding feedback. So I think that's could be a reflection of this, but I think it's just a general thing that people want in workplaces, to feel valued and to know that their contribution matters. And this is the last one. This I do hear sometimes folks say, it's important for me to use my education, right? They want to make sure that there was value in what they studied for X number of years. So let me show all 8 together on the slide. And so you can, those of you that can see them here, the security, stability, all the way to using your education, all 8 of them together. And my question for you folks is, what ones do you most relate to? Or are there other things that didn't make the cut that you really relate to? And I'd love to hear your answers to that in the chat. Which ones do you most relate to? Let me go back and show that slide. Live where I want, job security. Yeah, feel valued, money, right? All of them. Great. Security and stability and feeling passionate. Yep, stability resonates pretty well, all of them. Purpose and influence. Ooh, influence. Yes, influence. I think that's related to impact. All of the above, valued and happy, security, purpose are huge. Yeah, great. Awesome. Yeah. So these are, I'm priming you here, right, for our next discussion. Someone saying in the chat, I relate to all of those. I guess I'd add, on the flip of doing work that had a sense of purpose, I want to make sure I'm not working for an entity doing terrible things in the world. Right. Ideally, great. Okay. Right. So when folks start thinking about what's next, as you're doing, how to get a job after graduation is one way of putting that. Here's what they tend to imagine doing. They got a series of questions, and some of those questions might not be the right way of going about things, but let's go through them, right? So this is what I get a lot of from folks just starting to think about the process of, okay, how do I figure out what to do next and how to get a job that I want? So the first question I hear a lot of is, what can I do with my degree in X? What can I do with my degree in X, right? There's no bad questions. Okay, fair enough. Here's why I don't love this question, or why if you're asking it for yourself, you might, just use with caution, I guess, right? Proceed with caution. So it's maybe not the best question to ask, because employers outside of academia, they don't usually recruit by specific academic field or subfield. Of course, there are lots of exceptions to this, but you're really limiting your search potentially down to 0, depending on what you studied, or in the places that you actually are wanting to live, if you are looking for jobs that really match up very closely to your degree. Okay. And let me know if I'm missing the mark here, if there's any questions on any of these as I go on. So that was the first question. The second question, which again, fair enough, but maybe not the most bestest question, is, can you give me a list of PhD jobs? Right? Well, the answer is yes. And I will give you lists later on, but not the best question in the whole world. Why? Again, employers outside of academia actively recruit PhDs or MSCs in only a few select fields, right? So there are some fields where they do recruit, but a lot of masters in public health, masters of science, etc., they work in jobs that don't require those degrees. So if you limit your search down to positions that really ask for those degrees, it can make it seem like there aren't so many relevant positions for your knowledge and skills. And that's not it at all, right? That's not it at all. They just don't require them. The third question, how do I convert my CV to resume? This is super common. There was an article in University Affairs the other day, how to convert your CV to resume, that phrase. Oh, it drives me crazy. I get it, right? That's why I don't love it. Academic CVs, and if you're in a master's program or a PhD program, you might have a sense of these things. They can get really long. They include and reflect select information and experience, right? Really select information and experience. What's crucial here is that you have valuable experience, which is what employers are looking for, from activities that aren't included in meaningful ways on your CV, right? So the CV is limited. I'm just moving my keyboard because the cat has arrived. Okay. All right, one more question. Where do I look for jobs, right? Again, fair enough question. Why don't I love this one? Knowing relevant job boards is important, right? Totally has a place, but it's insufficient, right? It's insufficient for active job searching. Your most promising leads are very likely to come from people in your network, and they may never show up in searches. And I'll say why shortly. So job boards is not enough, right? It can lead into a passive approach to this, and you don't want to be doing that. Okay, so here's all four of them together. In general, this approach relies on readily available online job postings with direct connections between your degree and jobs. Now, that's fine, but limited. So it's not a great strategy. And it also assumes that jobs are posted online in places that you can find them, which is not always the case. So let's consider the employer's perspective on hiring. So here's more generally how hiring works from the employer's perspective. First of all, it can be really expensive, risky, and time consuming for them. And all of this at a time when they're already understaffed, right? They have a problem that they need solving now by hiring someone to do that work. And so they're, already busy. And so what that means for employers is that they have a particular way that they like to source candidates, AKA find people to interview and hire for open roles. I'll show you that on the next slide. So when an employer decides that they want to expand their team, they have a few different ways of going about that. And I know there's a lot of things happening on this slide, and we'll go through them. So a few different ways of going about adding to their team. In general, the order in which they do these things starts with looking around at who they already have. On the slide, the man is thinking, do I already know someone great for this role who I can just contact and hire? That is it, right? Apart from like looking around their current office and saying, Bob, you're promoted, right? Like that's the easiest. The second thing is like, do I know anybody already in my network that I can just phone or email, get on Zoom with and pitch to them? The very last thing an employer wants to do is to put an open call out on the internet. And so on the slide, there's a triangle. And the idea here is that most jobs are at the top of that triangle, most jobs, right? And as employers go like, okay, do I know anybody? Okay, well, the people that I know, do you know anybody? Okay, well, what about, doing this? And then the very last thing where the least desirable, hardest to fill jobs are, that's when employers are like, well, shit. I guess we better write up a formal job ad, post it online, and start looking at resumes. So I'm exaggerating, and obviously there's nuance here, but in general, this is what employers like. They don't want to do that, right? They don't want to open up all the floodgates to this large number of applications from online job portals. Yet, this is what applicants most often do first, is they go online and they look at open job calls and they submit resumes online. So you see, right, there's a disconnect here between the way that employers are approaching this for the most part and the way that job seekers are. And it means that job seekers who are taking the approach, only doing the last thing, is they're missing out on all those opportunities that got filled earlier. Does that make sense? Okay. So here is how, so that's all like, Jen, you're telling us what we're doing wrong. Okay, well, let me not be that person. So how do grad degree holders actually get great jobs? And this is the better, more fun way, as it turns out. And so on the next slide, I'll introduce my 3-step process, right, that I mentioned when we looked at the agenda. So that is, you want to set yourself up for success given how employers actually hire. So 3-step process. Those are, first, focus on yourself. And we did a bit of a preview of that already, right? When we did the going through the 8 things. So we'll do more of that. Focus on yourself. The second piece is to identify possibilities. That's when you do research, and it's when you start your networking, by the way. We'll talk more about that. And then the third part is then you market to employers, right? So the marketing piece comes last. And I use that language. You don't have to use the language market to employers, but I use that language because I do hear it a lot. It's not the only way to talk about this. Okay. So the first thing, this is where self-reflection questions are awesome. I love them because they get you focused on yourself instead of external factors or credentials. And I think this is really the right way to start a job search. And a great way to really start is to think about who you are at your best and what are the situations that support your being your best self. So a couple of my favorite questions, and I invite you to, as I ramble on, you can reflect a little bit for yourself. And I'll give you an opportunity to share in the chat if you want some of your insights. So the first question is, when do you feel most successful, energized, or engaged? I always say that the wrong way. When do you feel most successful, energized, or engaged? You can think about this in the context of your grad program, but also it doesn't have to be. It can be any time in your life, from any context, and really from any age. It can be from yesterday, it can be 4 years back, it can be 15 years back, right? It doesn't matter. When do you feel most successful, energized, or engaged? And I think it's really useful to be specific. So sometimes people say to me, well, I'm most engaged when I'm teaching. I'm like, okay, well, what bits of teaching? Grading? Is it grading? Is it lecturing? Is it designing your slide deck? Is it responding to student emails? Et cetera, right? So what specific bits? Is it sitting in office hours and you never know who's going to walk through the door next? And you're going to help brainstorm their problems, right? So what specific bits of this? Okay, so that's my first question. My second question, which I also really like, is what do you do that other folks don't? So this is about what choices that you make, right? This can often resonate with folks that work in a lab, let's say, and maybe there's like 20 other grad students and postdocs in the lab. And sometimes people think, well, I'm just the same as all the other folks in my lab, all the other folks in my subfield. Okay, but that's not actually true because you make different choices than they do. So as an example, there's a notebook on this slide, and in the notes it says, I'll read it out. I go out of my way to mentor undergrads. I started doing this when I was a new MSc student myself, and I still do it. No one else in my lab does this, right? So nobody else goes out of their way to mentor undergrad students. I stand out in my field, this is the second point, because I enjoy public speaking, right? So not everybody enjoys it. Cool. So that's examples of, how you might stand out, as they put it, but what choices do you make? And what does that say about you? Okay. Does anyone want to share any thoughts here about how they might make different choices, or what makes them different? I'm going to grab water and let you answer if you want. Excuse me, gulp. Okay. Let me go into more self-reflection here. What are your goals, your priorities, your values, and strengths? So this is one sentence with lots of different sub-questions to it. So this is a part of the self-reflection process where the focusing on yourself basically process, right? Where you can start to make lists and you can start to brainstorm. And you can be in conversation with other people around these and reflect on, okay, what really are my goals, my priorities, my values, and my strengths? I think it's really useful for you to get clear on all of that stuff. And I say this knowing that sometimes an academic environment can be, one way of putting it, really totalizing. So it can kind of take over everything and it can start to warp your sense of who you are. And if you're in alignment with academic goals, that's fantastic. But sometimes things don't quite fit. And so it's nice for you to just think like, well, hold on, actually, I don't really want a tenure track job, even though academic culture is telling me that I do. So this is about your opportunity to be really selfish, right? What do you want? Okay. So you can make those lists. Next, master resume. So this is potentially a big task, but this is where you want to do like a data dump essentially. Just get all the things down on paper. What this is helpful for you to do is to remember that you are, again, you're more than your CV, like I alluded to earlier. There's more to you than just shows up in your academic CV. So make sure just to have it, just make that big master resume, include all of the things. It's not going to be pretty. You don't have to show anybody else, but it's just going to be helpful later on when we start to do the marketing piece, right? That you have a database. It doesn't have to be a database, but like a long Word doc or whatever, you know what I mean, right? Just get it all down so that you remember it later. Okay. Okay. So that ends our moment of step one, focus on yourself. So I'm going to move into step two next, check the time. Okay. Which is identify possibilities, right? Identify possibilities. Okay. So this is when you start to look around what's out there and you select a few options, you broaden or you narrow, whatever it means for you. So now comes more lists. So here you're going to look at your knowledge, your interests, and your skills. You make those lists. You might rank them by aptitude or enjoyment, like what am I really good at versus what do I most like to do? You might note which ones you love doing versus ones you never, ever want to do again, if you can at all avoid it. You can also make a list of your contacts, right? Who do you know? Because who and what you already know is important here. At this point, right? So you've made a lot of lists, you've got messy documents, you've kind of just put everything on paper. And at this point, you might want to sit back, go for a walk, bundle up, whatever it is, and take a stab at writing a mission statement for your job search. So I'll have an example of that on the next slide, and I'll read it out to you. So before I show you what it is, I want you to note that if you're feeling like, whoa, Jen, this is way too much, that's cool because you haven't done all your lists yet. Okay. So example mission statement. I am looking for a position where I will blank, right? So this is where you fill in the blank by drawing on my skills in blank, right? The second bullet point. This builds on my knowledge of blank and experience doing blank to secure the lifestyle and working environment I thrive in. I'm focusing on opportunities that blank. I will know that I'm successful if blank. Ultimately, I will contribute to blank. You can see how this is putting together some of the lists and the ranking that you made, but also alludes back to our earlier discussion about, purpose and, I want to have an impact and all of that good stuff. This statement, if you write something like this, it's for your own use. So it doesn't have to be pretty. You can change it at any time. But having said that, you can certainly share versions of it with folks in your network or like on LinkedIn, for example. You can also develop them into what are called elevator pitches. Though those will be easier to create and deliver later on in the process. Okay, so let me go back. Let's go back to this identity process. So, okay, the figure on this screen is asking, so what jobs might suit me given A, B, and C? So this is the point where you might, you have your research, your mission statement, you've got your list, you're starting to get a kind of a sense of where you excel compared to other people who have your same credentials. And you want to do some research to figure out how your knowledge, interests, skills, etc., all the good stuff match up with potential employers and types of work. So we'll talk about that next. So how to do this research, how to match up, who you are, what you want, what you know, etc., with what's actually out there. Whoa, okay. lots of text on this slide. So you might find useful lists and other information online by Googling things like, jobs for PhDs in neuroscience. But don't worry if you don't find anything that interests you, okay? So these lists are a tool. And I'll share the link to this specific uh, document in the chat. So on the slide, that should work. I've put it in the chat. On the slide are screen grabs from a document that was prepared by Lauren Easterling. She's in the US, and it's titled Possible Careers for PhDs in Biomedical Science. And then, yeah, as if you can see the slide, it says 122 jobs, 122 jobs on that list. So boy, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. So there are lists that are out there and they can be useful. Another list, let me go, okay. Another list is this one. This is a list, it's incomplete, it's super incomplete, and it's one that I put together for a group of developmental psychology PhD students. And I was looking at it yesterday and thought to myself, I think actually this group, this group that I'm speaking to, you folks, you could have most of these jobs on your own starter list too, if you wanted. So there's a ton of information on this slide. Academia, so divided into two groups, workplaces and job types. So the workplaces range from academia, post-secondary, K-12 education, government, healthcare, nonprofits, businesses of all kinds, consulting firms, think tanks, and being self-employed. And then job types, research, all sorts of kinds of research, from R&D to more specific types of research, including market research, data and statistical analysis, the X fields in tech, they like to call the user experience, customer experience, the learning experience, program and project management, clinical trials management, right? That might be cool for some of you, evaluation and assessment, teaching and learning, writing, development, blah, 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 blah. Whoa, too many options, right? Too many options. Okay. So there are a lot of general and more specific tools and exploration resources out there, right? So you can Google, you can find lots of lists, you can find tools out there. You can spend hours looking at career outcomes, right? That's a term that folks use, career outcomes data from university tracking projects. Specific PhD tools or grad students and postdocs are also included in this. For the STEM folks, the science folks, my IDP is often recommended. Don't love it, but okay. It's there, it's free. For social science and humanities folks, there might be some of you here. Of course, STEM folks can also use it. And I know that STEM folks do find this useful as well. There's a tool called Imagine PhD. These were put together specifically for PhDs and graduate students. So they might be really helpful for you. But I find that tools and assessments can be kind of hit or miss. So my recommendation is to use them if you find them helpful and to stop the second you feel discouraged. I'll give you an example of what discouragement looks like. And I experience this too. You do one of these assessments, you take one of these surveys, and at the end of it, you spend all this time doing it. And at the end, it's like, you should be a college professor. You're like, oh, I know, but not helpful, right? Not helpful. So it can be discouraging because what the assessment is actually saying is that you match up a lot of the qualities and values that you have match up to people that happen to have jobs as professors. That doesn't mean that you aren't suited to any other type of work, but that's how we interpret it. So I'm belaboring my point, but use these things if they're helpful. And when you get discouraged, if you ever get discouraged, just know that it's them, it's not you, and you can just move on, right? Okay. The same holds true, my opinions about assessments. The same thing holds true about tools that aren't specific to grad students and PhDs. And there's a whole range of those. And you might have taken some from your career services. You might know about them, like the Myers-Briggs, for example, is on this list. They can give you all kinds of really useful insights and information, both about yourself and about the world of work. So I am, despite all my reservations, I am pro doing these things because they can be really useful, but just don't get hung up on them. Have I adequately belabored that point? Nods, yes. Please move on, Jen. Okay. What you will wind up doing depends entirely on what you want in your life and what or who you've already got in it. So that's why all of this focus, right, on who you are, and then really doing the work to identify what makes sense for you. So, for example, if you want to stay in St. John's, you'll have different options. That's not a judgment, it's just the reality. You'll have different options. And if you decide to move to the Bay Area, right, like California, Silicon Valley, or if you decide you want to live in Ottawa, right, these are different job markets. If earning a super fantastic, amazing income is important to you, you may decide not to do a postdoc, or maybe you should do. I mean, it just depends, right? Who you already know when you're actively on the job market can be crucial. So then networking does matter, and we'll talk about that. And what you know how to do, and the experiences you've had, and experiences broadly defined, paid work, education, of course, and hobbies, all of that can give you important skills and preparation for positions that your peers don't have. It's not a competition, but it's a way that you can say, hey, I actually do have all of these things because I've put emphasis on different things. And your supervisors can totally play a role in this. And I know at MUN, supervisors are really encouraged to provide you with professional development, as within reason. So you can ask them for support in doing all of this. A note that you might find yourself in a career that's completely unrelated to what you studied. And that's true for me. And that's cool. I mean, plenty of people are working and want to work in doing work that really closely aligns to what they studied. And that's awesome. And others don't. And that's fine too. So the task ahead here, especially if you're earlier on in your studies, is to pay attention to the choices that you make, right? And the opportunities that come your way. And over time, you can make more strategic decisions about where you put your energy to better set you up for success after graduation. And because your network will be really crucial, because education itself, it's not enough on its own. You have to have the network, unfortunately. Let's talk about networking. And just a reminder, folks, interrupt me at any time. Pop in the chat. I keep looking over there. That's the chat. Anything is unclear, or you think I've missed something. All right. So I know that, at 1:15, which is what, 2:45, right? Your time, you haven't necessarily whittled down your short list because you haven't done all of the things that we've talked about doing. But in this imaginary future, a few weeks from now, let's say you've come up with a bit of a short list for yourself because you've done some self-reflection, you've made some lists, you've done a little bit of research, maybe you've done some assessments, you hopefully haven't gotten annoyed by them, and you're like, okay, medical science liaison, that sounds interesting, or medical writing. or something that doesn't have medical in it, like I want to work in a teaching and learning center, right? So you might have selected two or three things. Great. Okay. But it's still early days yet in this research project, right? Let's call it what it is. It's a research project. And because it's early days, that means it's time to, do more research. And the best way, not the only way, but the best way to do that research is to go straight to the source. And that is people who are already doing the work you are interested in doing. Alert, alert. We're going to talk about networking. Okay. So as the character says on the slide, folks say I have to network. How do I do that online? Let's talk about that. How do I network online? It's a great question. And to answer it, I'll start with a definition that'll come up on the next slide, because I know the term networking can conjure up all kinds of ideas. And some of those ideas are pretty off-putting, particularly to the introverts among us. Is anyone in the room an introvert? Anyone else, I should say? Me? Any other introverts? You can just type Y in the chat if you want, because I can't see you. I'm going to say yes to that. Awesome. Yes. High five, fellow introverts. Great. So this is for you too, right? This is for you too. All right. Definition as promised. And I see, yes, lots of introverts in the room today. Networking is any activity that puts you in active conversation with members of your professional community or a group you're interested in joining. Networking is any activity that puts you in active conversation with members of your professional community or a group you're interested in joining. That's it. One sentence. There is nothing in this sentence about handing out business cards, wearing a suit in a stuffy room filled with salesmen, right? Right? There's nothing about that. So just about conversation with people that share your interests. Let's talk now about the purpose of networking. The purpose of networking. So the purpose of networking includes, and I've got 4 points to make, building positive relationships with people who share your interests. Just said that, right? So building positive relationships with people who share your interests. This is, the people that'll be in your network. That's fun, right? The second point, gaining and sharing knowledge, especially insider information. So stuff that's not so readily available to you because if you're currently on the outside. 3, learning new insights and perspectives to enhance your own expertise. So I assume on some level, all of us have strengths in learning and curiosity and perspective taking. This is an awesome opportunity to draw on those strengths. And then the 4th point, giving and receiving referrals for collaborations, paid work, and any other professional opportunities. Now, at this point, you might be, nodding and thinking to yourself, yeah, why do all of that stuff as a grad student, as a postdoc? Yes, you do, right? You do. So you already do all of this stuff. Networking isn't only valuable during job searches. So the character on the screen is asking, what do I gain from this? Well, I hope that you're starting to have an answer. You're starting to have an answer. It's all kind of really positive stuff. Networking can be formal or informal. And yes, you can totally do it online during a global pandemic. So examples of networking include like one-on-one meetings, right? So you get together with somebody over the phone or Zoom. I do that a lot. Small group meetings could be networking. Networking events, so things that are specifically billed as such. Planned events or experiences can turn into impromptu networking opportunities. So, for example, a conference presentation can turn into conversation over coffee or, these days over what's it called, GatherTown or whatever online platforms, Hopin, whatever platforms we're using. A guest lecture by a visiting researcher can turn into meeting members of the lab. Again, these can all happen online, and you've probably experienced some of those. creative pandemic proof, as I call them, networking strategies. So let me give you some more, some kind of, as people say, more fulsome, I don't think that's the right word for it, but more embodied examples of this. So let's say a researcher reads a great paper. So, you read a paper and you recognize, oh, hey, I already follow this person on Twitter. I already follow the authors on Twitter. And so you DM them, you send them a direct message on Twitter and you begin a conversation. Or a similar example, someone tweeted, I think this morning saying, I read this great article. Should I email the author and tell them I thought they were awesome? Yes, please do that, right? That can be the start of great networking. Another example, a grad student hosts a live bi-weekly themed discussion via Zoom for scholars conducting research in her field. That's a real example from someone in Alberta, I think. Great, that's a fantastic way of networking. It's not necessarily set up as networking, but it can certainly turn into it. How about a professor who hosts a regular Twitter chat, each one focusing on a specific journal article, and the authors are encouraged to attend? That's fun. Or another example, a postdoc who wasn't able to deliver a conference paper decides to do it online and invites anyone interested to attend. Brilliant. So, and remember the definition. Networking is any activity that puts you in active conversation with members of your professional community or community you're interested in joining, right? So there's so many possibilities here. What about connecting with new people? Well, that's a great thing to do, and I do it all the time. So all of your social media platforms, if you're on them. Now, I'm personally very online, and you don't have to be, right? I say that as somebody who's really online. You do not have to be. Social media interactions, if you're on any of the social media platforms, and like ResearchGate and LinkedIn are social media platforms as much as Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. I'm not even on Instagram. Interactions on other online communities or forums, like think Slack, or if you're in any Discogs or Mighty Networks. If you're not in any of these, don't worry about it. Email, right? Email is online. Email is online. Any chat conversations during Zoom meetings. So I don't know if anybody is having a back channel conversation in our meeting right now, but right, that can be a form of networking if you want it to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So question for you folks in the room. How have you made meaningful connections online? So notice in this question, I'm assuming that you have. So tell me, how have you made meaningful connections online? I'm going to grab some water and I'm happy to hear like your thoughts about that. How have you made meaningful connections online? Oh, I've reconnected with peers in past programs. Oh, that's fantastic. That's excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. Joining Zoom workshops from other universities, going over topics related to research I'm interested in or actively working on. Yeah, isn't this awesome? Isn't it so great that you can now attend all of these events that used to be in person? And if you weren't there in Toronto or Ottawa or San Francisco, you couldn't go. I think it's brilliant. Twitter has been awesome. I've connected with other researchers in other parts of the world from replying to a tweet or DMing them. What's really cool about social media, I mean, social media is all of the things it is all of the things. But one of the good things about social media is that it's really informal. It's really informal. So even if you know that somebody's a full professor, they're whining on Twitter about their dog barking during a Zoom meeting just as much as you are as a grad student. So you can just send them a DM or reply to them on Twitter, and it's cool. That's what's good about it. Ask questions via Twitter DM, right? And more shout outs for Twitter, Facebook Messenger, Zoom, LinkedIn. Great. Participating in live webinars, for example, learning a new software platform. Awesome. Ooh, yes. Yes, I saw me speak at you saw me speak at kegs and wrote to her. Exactly. Keeping in contact with previous graduate cohorts for collaboration. Fantastic. Tune into symposium and webinars from across the world. Yes, excellent examples, right? So you're already doing that. That's great to know. So all of these skills that you already have are continuing to develop for networking is going to come in handy because that is the next part of this process. We're still in identify possibilities, and that is, let me go back here. All right, it is time to do informational interviews. So the slide says informational interviews and other convos about careers, right? Other conversations. An informational interview is when you speak with someone about their job, their career, or their field in general. These informal interviews, right? They're informal, are your best opportunity to learn about the world of work direct from insiders. And they are a standard practice, particularly for new grads and career changers. But everybody does them, right? I know it's a bit of a weird term, informational interview, and you may never have heard it before, but it is a standard, regular thing. They are a form of networking, but they're a bit more lopsided than other networking conversations you might have because you'll do more listening than talking. Potentially, you'll see how the conversation goes, but the setup of these is like you are interviewing somebody else, so you're listening. One great way to identify folks that you already have a connection to that you might not realize, although this came out in your shares just a minute ago, is to find alumni from your program or other programs elsewhere at MUN or other universities or other programs that you've been to. Graduate alumni, in my experience, they really get it, especially folks who are only a few years into their post-grad careers. So they want to help you and they're happy to do it. They might be busy, it might not be the right time, but they're happy to give back. They want to. So at this point, we're still in identify. At this point, you want to learn information and gain insights from folks who are best placed to inform and advise you. So some of the people who can inform and advise you are professors, potentially, for sure. And of course, professors have networks too, and you can tap into them, hopefully. But you can't only talk to professors because they don't work directly in all of the other different types of jobs. Of course, it's not a judgment, right? It's just reality. If you want to learn about life as a self-employed career coach, you should ask me and not your supervisor, right? Obviously. Okay. The identify stage, right? Step 2, where we're at, is where you also figure out if you are missing any experience, skills, or credentials that you're learning that you need for specific types of work. If you got the time and the inclination, you can pursue those. You can fill those gaps, as you learn that you need to, if you learn that you need to. If you don't have the time or you're like, I don't want to do a library science degree, right? I thought I wanted to be a librarian, but everybody's telling me I need an MLIS and I don't want to go back to school for a 3-year MLIS. Okay. So you can ask people, what about other possibilities that don't require an MLIS or whatever? So there are always alternatives. So the question on the slide is, do you need additional skills and experience? Well, maybe. It depends. I would love to be able to tell you that the answer is always no, but you're in grad school in parts to get into a career in part. And so that sometimes, specific things are required for specific things. So it's great at this point to ask people, what really is required in terms of experience, skills, and credentials so that you can think to yourself, okay, do I have them? If I don't, do I want to get them? And if I don't really want to get them, that's fine. What else can I continue pursuing so that I can, stop wasting my time here? Does that make sense? Does that make sense, folks? You can put a no in the chat if it doesn't. I don't see any no's yet. Yes, it makes sense. Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'm talking so much at you. So let me pause. What will work for you in terms of doing networking, in terms of researching possibilities? What forms of online networking are you interested in trying, or are you already doing? Are you doing informational interviews? So here's your chance. Let's get some accountability going. What are you going to do now? What are you doing now? And what will you do? I'm going to get more water and invite you to type in the chat any thoughts you have about what you're planning on doing. Anyone planning on doing informational interviews after I've just plugged them? Informational interviews for sure. I think tapping into resources and people I know will be a great way of adding perspective. Exactly. I think that's a great approach. Start with folks that you already know. Oh, I finally made a Twitter account last month. It's already yielded good new connections and reconnections with old acquaintances. Fantastic. Fantastic. Yep. More networking. Yeah, awesome. Awesome. And I'm hoping that I'm making the point here implicitly that I don't necessarily mean for you to add on all this other stuff when you're already busy. It's already a pandemic, you're busy. I'm not suggesting, hopefully, that you do all of this other stuff. But it's about doing some reflection, right? Step 1, and then step 2, doing some quick research and starting to chat with folks. And I really do recommend doing informational interviews relatively early on in the process. Some people can spend endless amounts of time kind of researching things online. The reality is that getting a job is an art and a science. And a lot of jobs are really broadly similar. And so talking with folks, particularly the ones you already know, moving on quickly, not looking for perfection, right? I think that's a really important part of this. More in the chat here, talking with previous co-authors more too. Brilliant. Oh, and Valerie's put their Twitter handle in the chat. You can follow them if you like. Great. Okay. Step 3 of this process is marketing yourself. As I mentioned a while ago now, the marketing yourself, you don't have to call it that. Let's call it that. This is about marketing your skills, your experiences, your strengths, etc., to employers and potential colleagues. By now in the process, right, if you've done all this work so far, you're pretty clear on who you are and what you want. And you've identified some possible options that align with your goals and interests. So you have a sense of who you are in the world, maybe in a bit more of an abstract way. And you say, and you've identified, okay, and I can be that person. I can have those situations. It really seems like in options A, B, and C. Brilliant. You've also by now done a handful of informational interviews to get a really just clearer picture of what kinds of work, what that work actually looks like day to day, and sounds good to you so far. So this is all really exciting, amazing, right? And you're still keen on those options. You're still thinking, wow, medical science liaison, that sounds brilliant. You're still thinking like, ooh, research development, that sounds amazing. You've also along the way built up a decent network of professionals in different fields, and not just academics, all of them too. So that's all from doing all of this work that you've done already. Great. Someone's written in the chat, I subscribe to a lot of industry job alerts from various sites and keep a record of companies that are hiring for positions that match my skill set. Excellent tip. Professional organization message boards are another good place to find positions that are not posted on public sites. Awesome. Yes, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mary. That's great. And the idea here is that you're collecting research. You're not ready to apply necessarily, but you're just taking note. You're just taking note. You're making lists of employers alongside all of your other lists. Okay. So the graphic on this slide, the kind of cartoon in person says, I'm targeting A and B, so that means I need X, Y, and Z. Okay, so what does this mean? The specifics of how to market yourself to employers differs according to your target industries and roles. So I'm not going to go into specifics because, for example, if you're applying for junior UX role, a user experience designer role, you might submit a one-page resume. But if you're applying for a job at a teaching and learning center, your resume is going to look a little more boring and it's probably going to be 2 pages, right? Right. These are they're kind of different styles. So I won't be, or some jobs, even in industry, quote unquote, you would include your publications. Most other jobs you wouldn't. So there's variety here. Okay. The good news is that by this time, when you've reached this stage, you'll be an active job seeker, right? So the market stage is like, okay, active job seeker mode. Put that hat on. You'll have a growing network that you can go to for specific advice about stuff like that, and a sense of what's required for the jobs you want, because along the way you will have asked people like, what are employers really looking for in the UX? What are medical affairs professionals who are hiring MLS junior roles, what are they really looking for? Right? You'll have much more of a sense. You'll be involved in the conversation. And because, with some exceptions, most jobs aren't posted super long in advance, there's no rush to start this market stage until you're, say, 4 to 6 months out from wanting to have a job. Now, some of you may be at that point now, right? If you're graduating this summer, okay. So if you are, you want to kind of just quickly make sure, like, okay, do I have a sense of what I want? Great. Have I done some preliminary research? Okay. Have I done some informational interviews? Okay. How am I sitting with all this information? Great. What else do I need to learn so that I can start to market myself, right? So you can be really targeted and start applying 4 to 6 months out from when you want to get a job. There's no hard and fast rule. Sometimes hiring can happen within a week, right? Sometimes it takes a year. Hello, government. Hello, academia. So there's huge variety here. But all the more reason, especially if you're earlier on in your studies, or if your job search, your active job search isn't looming, this is a great opportunity to really lean into the first 2 parts of this process. And spoiler alert, they're totally going to help you in grad school too, right? Because you'll make better decisions as a grad student. You'll have a better experience. All right. If anyone disagrees with me, just let me know. I'm pretty convinced on that. But having said I won't get into specifics, you will probably want a LinkedIn profile. So shout out to LinkedIn. The slide says you probably need and want a LinkedIn profile. It's a great place to tell your story online. It shows up really high on Google search. So if somebody is going to Google you, their LinkedIn profile is probably going to pop up first or second, right? It's better than your Facebook page. And it gives you an online platform to tell your professional story in a way that, you have a lot more control over it than some other platforms. And you don't have to create your own website, which you can also do, but LinkedIn is the standard. LinkedIn is great. And I say that knowing that a lot of postdoc opportunities are posted on LinkedIn. Of course, professionals across all sorts of different fields are really active on LinkedIn. Not every single profession, but most of them are really active on there. So even if you're focused on academic jobs, it's still useful to have it. And there's an anecdote I want to share that the latest edition of What Color is Your Parachute, which is like this classic career guide. What color is your parachute? It's called. The chapter that's on resumes, right? There's a whole chapter on resumes. The chapter title is called Your Resume is Already Online. So that chapter starts by saying, yeah, actually, you should be on the internet. And then it does talk about resumes, because you probably will have to submit a resume at some point. But the internet is more important than you might realize. So if you're not online, it's a missed opportunity. Okay. So we're getting towards the end here. Let me recap. Put this all together. So the 3-step process: focus on yourself, identify possibilities, market to employers. Where are you in all of this? And how confident do you feel about moving from, say, focus to identify, or from identify to market? That'll help you figure out what you want to do. And that is my next question for you, is what do you, people in the room, what do you need to do next? So I'm going to ask you to put in the chat your thoughts on this, but let me give you some optional homework, right? So let me suggest a few things. I don't need you to do any of these things, but let me give you some options here. So You could, for example, respond to those 2 self-reflection questions that I posed to you early. Maybe you want to go and create your lists of your goals, priorities, values, strengths, skills, knowledge, experience, and interests, right? That could be good homework for you. Maybe you want to add your paid work, your education, and volunteer experiences to a master resume document. That could be a neat thing. How about drafting your job search mission statement? Ooh, good exercise. Come up with a short list of job options to explore. Make a list of people to contact for informational interviews and send some emails or some DMs on Twitter if you're there. How about update your LinkedIn profile to highlight your mission and key skills and experiences, right? Have you looked at LinkedIn lately? Or maybe you want to make a more involved career exploration and job search plan for yourself. 18-month job search strategic plan. What will you do now to get set for what's next? The title of this presentation. What are you going to do now to get set for what's next? So again, let me take some water and mute myself and give you a couple minutes. And I'd love for you to share in the chat if you feel up to it, any thoughts about what your plan will be. We won't hold you to it, but it can be useful to type it out loud, as it were, for accountability purposes. Let me mute and gulp. So we got Stephanie who's going to make all the lists. Awesome. That's great. Christy, I'll definitely be updating my LinkedIn and making a Twitter. Ooh, to start networking. Yeah, love it. Chelsea, my LinkedIn profile is in serious need of an update. Oh, mine too. So that'll be first line of business. Yeah, fun. Updating LinkedIn. Read your blog. Ha. But honestly, I felt like I'm flailing around a bit. Though a lot of these activities, I need to regroup a bit. Okay, that's great. Regroup. I would say, if you like this structure, this framework of focus, identify, aka research and networking, market, see where you fit in all of those, and maybe go back and fill some of the stuff you might have skipped early on. Update Twitter, be more active on, update LinkedIn, be more active on Twitter. Awesome. I need to focus on myself and create a LinkedIn profile. Brilliant. So yeah, so it sounds like lots of folks are talking about LinkedIn, a few on Twitter, one shout out for informational interviews. That's great. And I'm repeating myself, but I would really encourage you, even if you're years away from being an active job seeker, have some informational interviews. Start with folks you know and say, hey, I'd love to chat with you about your job. I'm starting to think about, what kind of work I would like to do a few years from now. And I've always been interested to know what an acquisitions editor at a university press does. Can we chat for 20 minutes? Because I'll ask you questions about what do you do every day and what's most valuable about your work and what do you find most frustrating and what kind of job titles should I look out for an entry-level position? Whatever. As an early grad student, I think focusing on myself and networking will be really helpful. Great, I agree. Well done. Thank you so much, everybody, for contributing all of this. Ooh, someone's going to take a stab at the mission statement. Love it. Okay. So this slide is intentionally blank, and this is my pitch for you to take advantage of whatever helpful resources you can get from your supervisor, department, faculty, campus, other research institutes that you're associated with, any professional associations that you're a member of, just whatever is out there. There's lots of stuff. There's lots of free or stuff that you kind of already pay for because you're a student. That's out there. I would definitely recommend taking advantage, just like you're here today. And I invite, Anne, if there's anything you want to share about specific resources at MUN that folks should know about, please, I'm happy to give you the mic.
Thanks so much, Jen. I just follow so closely all the things that you say, and I did take a few notes. And, I was thinking about the limitations even of career fairs on campus. So really that's just, it's not the bottom of the pyramid, but it's not that far away from that bottom because it's, sometimes driven by local economy and maybe not necessarily in alignment with what students are looking for. So, taking an active approach, I think, is absolutely clear. And marketing graduate school as a pipeline to a career. I mean, people don't think that way, right? But it is. And these are the knowledge creators, the innovators that we want to move into Canada's economy. So just hoping that tools like this and launching students early, mid, and late program into really thinking about narrowing down what they want to do, based on some of your tips, is just huge for that positive bright light to completion. Because I think sometimes maybe students don't want to complete because the next part is so scary. So hanging around because it's comfy.
And there's some research that is showing that students who participate in professional development activities, even internships, so even things that take them away from the lab for some maybe months at a time. And there's lots of ways of participating in professional development, including like this presentation, but the participation in those programs and taking advantage of those resources do not affect or potentially even positively impact research productivity. That's a big mouthful, but the point is they don't delay you and they might even help you finish. And I would personally think, yeah, they help you finish and have a better time and have a better start afterwards. Okay, so I have one last slide, and that is thank you. Thank you everyone so much. It's been great to be with you. Let me take my slide deck down, and that means the captions will disappear, which I'm assuming is okay, and we can do some Q&A. I'll take a breath. Thank you all. Awesome. And I'm going to switch you all to gallery view. Great. Awesome. I can see well some of you. Hi. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Looking at the chat. Internships and co-ops can be extremely helpful for networking and exposure to certain career trajectories. Fantastic. Totally. Yeah. And I know, let me not tell you to break any rules, but in theory, grad school can be flexible. So if there's stuff that you want to do, if there's things that you want to take advantage of, you might be able to, even if it's not explicitly kind of allowed, right? Just ask. Just ask. Great. Yep. If you got to run, thank you. Thank you. And I don't know how you want to do this, but I'm happy for folks to just unmute or type in the chat, whatever folks are comfortable doing. Happy to take your questions, your comments.
I might be typing. Let's see.
A question that I always like to ask folks is, what did you find surprising in this session? What did you find surprising?
So I have a comment, actually, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Jana Andronowski. I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Medicine here at MUN. So like you, I had a mission statement for my job search, and I was surprised that more people don't do this. So I think that was a great tip to offer our students. A number of my grad students and my postdoc are in this session. So it's one of the things we haven't gotten to yet in our sort of mini professional development series that I host within our lab group meetings.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. That's great.
Thank you. It's fantastic.
Yay.
Can I ask a very niche question that might not be relevant to other people? Thank you for the presentation. And I mean, I think I am more gearing towards academic or at least research related nonprofit, maybe boutique consulting firm sounds really nice. But so my research is in pornography and I'm very much in the sex work, porn, sex, all the red lights go off, right? And I'm trying to keep my Twitter as safe for work as possible, but it is what it is. So, obviously that's where I'm passionate, and I hope to work in a place where that's not going to be an issue. That's why I've always been really out about everything, because I figure it'll filter for me. But I guess just your thoughts on brand, I hate to say branding, but like how to use that advantageously and not to completely shoot myself in the foot.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, well, one way I would answer this is by starting off by saying, how committed are you to the specific topic? And whatever your answer is the right answer, right? And so you could be committed to the topic, or you could be a little bit less committed to the topic, but really want to lean into the skills as a researcher or as a policy analyst, as whatever, right? And it could be both. But I think that those are two kind of related but different things. And the answer can be both, Jen. And then, yeah, I think as you develop a brand, as you continue to develop a brand, you can become known as somebody who has expertise in this particular topics, but you might decide to branch out more into gender equity, equity, EDI work, etc. And there's a ton of nonprofits and governments at various different, right, all of the different levels of government. Excuse me. I can think, depending on the angles of this, lots of different, like school boards, even higher ed. I mean, there potentially are spaces, depending on, but there are specific. I often point to my dissertation. You can't see my mic is blocking it, and say like that look at Americans running around revolutionary Russia was never going to turn into a job, because that's not a job, and that's okay. That's okay. But there are jobs for people with historical research and thinking skills. I'm being maybe slightly not great at answering your question. What are you thinking?
No, that's, I definitely am committed to the topic, but also recognize the skill set goes beyond the topic. So I guess, it's a little bit of the both, but how, I suppose, ways to avoid even applying to a place where that's going to wind up being a liability for me, I guess, is part of why I've often been quite explicitly out about the seedy nature of some of my research and methods.
And the networking is going to be super important for you, because you'll be able to tell.
right from the jump.
Yeah. And then you don't waste your time applying for stuff. And networking is great, because people that are in the field, they of course know about their specific job, they know about the organization, but they often know quite a lot about the sector as a whole. And so they'll be able to tell you from the very first conversation, like, yeah, those guys look cool on their website, but we know the truth. And you probably know some of that already by being networked in the field.
Awesome, thanks. That's a good one in the chat.
I've gotten mixed advice about taking a job that isn't really what you want and how to get to your dream job. What's your take on that? Well, sometimes you gotta work. Sometimes you gotta work. So my take is like, you gotta do what you gotta do. Having said that, there are always opportunities. I don't mean to sound like one of those people who's like happy and chipper and like, there's always opportunities around the corner, but there are. So it's hard to answer in the abstract. It really depends on you. But some people out there will say things like, well, you have to be really strategic about your first job because that shapes the whole rest of your career. Come on. It's a big wide world out there. It's not like that anymore. People shift and pivot and change and transition. Like this is just how it is. So I think, like, don't put too much stress. You got to do what you got to do. And, as much as you want to. Anne, let me stop talking.
I didn't want to interrupt. I just want to highlight a few of the lines that you read, and I hope I don't misquote you, but, when you say, like, why would you want to go through all this effort of graduate school, not end up with the dream job of your dreams? Don't give up, right? I mean, really, you are trying to define what you want. And sure, if you need to eat, that's okay. But even maybe that opportunity would add something to that skill set when you make the next pivot. And I think being honest about pivoting, I think is the right way to be, not like my parents or whatever, where you just went on a straight line and that was that. Ugh. Give permission to pivot.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, about, how can this opportunity, which I'm going to take and I'm not in love with, but, for reasons X, Y, and Z, I'm going to pursue it. What else can I gain from it? Other than a paycheck and benefits or whatever, right? What else can I gain from it? And help you make better decisions. I'm in a really small field, so a lot of people work in adjacent areas. Yeah, excellent. That's a great way of framing it. Any suggestions for obtaining non-academic work in fields positions where a PhD isn't required, but your specialty is appreciated? Yes. So I would say in response to this that most PhDs who work outside of academia, so outside of jobs as professors, most PhDs broadly across all disciplines will work in jobs that do not require them to have a PhD. So that's not a put down. It's just that when you apply for a job, it doesn't have PhD required. Sometimes it has, master's or PhD preferred, but it's not required. And that's because from the employer's perspective, PhDs are what, like 1%, 2% of Canada's population? The employers, if they want to hire somebody good, they're thinking, well, heck, somebody with a master's degree and like 10 years of experience in the field could be just as good, if not better, than a PhD. So I hope I'm being clear here that I don't want you to limit yourself to jobs that require a PhD. And it's not that it's a bad job. It's just that employers are trying to be smart about things. Does that make sense? Randy, does that make sense? I know it's one of the things that folks can find kind of like depressing. And I've totally did that. I would go on years ago, I would go on the internet and I would type in, PhD job, and there's not a lot. In the humanities, you get like professor jobs and nothing else. But there's plenty, people say this to me all the time, that even though the PhD isn't required in my line of work, I personally know, maybe my manager knows, my colleagues really value what I bring to it. It wasn't required, but I have it, and I bring those skills and experiences to the job. Yeah, great. I'm glad that makes sense. What else?
How do we keep headshots looking like we actually look in a pandemic when we dye our hair every time we get sad / can't cut it for a year?
I haven't, my headshot is from 2017, and you saw it at the beginning of the presentation, right?
Is that important though? Because I literally look different in every photo that's on me on the internet.
I don't think
where people like, I don't believe you're you.
No, I don't think it's important. I don't think it's important.
But is good headshot important though, you think?
Yeah. I think a good headshot is important. And what do I define as good? I think a selfie taken in good lighting, right? That I have outdoor, my window is there. A selfie in good lighting is a good headshot potentially, right? You probably want to smile. I don't mean to gender it, but I probably want to smile. Big teeth or not, doesn't have to be. And it's we didn't talk about this in the presentation, but for LinkedIn, having a headshot, and hopefully one that's shoulders and kind of head, not you cropped off at a wedding. I'm making fun, but doesn't have to be amazing, but just, decent lighting. That's going to be super important for LinkedIn, because people do want to know that you're a real alive person. Somebody phoned me yesterday for a networking conversation, and he phoned me and I was like, oh, the phone. Wow. And he's like, I know, Jen, I usually want to do it on Zoom because I want people to know that I'm a real alive person. I'm like, no, I know. It's okay. Yeah. So I would say definitely have a headshot, but it doesn't have to be fancy. I paid someone to take my headshots, but you don't have to do that unless you want to. And there can be campus events sometimes where they'll do it for you. They bring a photographer.
I was just going to say, I think that we have a professional photographer in the Faculty of Medicine, and I think, I know they do it for the medical students, and I'm sure if you requested, Jen Armstrong would do a professional headshot for you.
I've done so many, but then I keep changing my hair.
It's okay. It's okay.
Jen, there's another question there in the chat.
Many jobs that hire PhDs or graduates for lab research have very broad desired technical skills. How broad a net can you cast in applying for these types of jobs if you don't have all of the specific required skills, but could learn them? Great. Suggestions for ways to showcase. Okay. Yeah. So, haha. If something is, okay, first of all, the way that job ads are written is not necessarily a true reflection of how the job will end up in person. So know that about job ads, that they are fallible. They are fallible. And let me know, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes, but it is time, I believe. So if anybody's got to run, cool. But I'll answer this question. And if there's any more. Okay, so job ads are fallible. If there are things that are required and you have 100%, great. You might be bored, right? If you have 75% of what's required, I would say, hopefully more than 60, but like, if you got like a good chunk of what's required, great, you're good. If as the question asker is pointing out that you don't have 100% of them, that's fine. Apply. If you think that they're really key to the job and you could learn them, right? If you've sussed out from what you know about the field, right, from your informational interviews, your other research that you've done, it's something that you can address in a cover letter and potentially in an interview, right? So you can always point out, I haven't used that particular technology before, but I have used this, this, and this. And, I have a plan for learning that. So there are ways of doing that. And a cover letter is a great place to point out anything that you think you're missing. Cover letters are not just what you're missing, but, it can be. If you're like, I don't have this, then the cover letter is a great place for that. Yeah. And in general, I mean, that's what networking is great for. So the more networking you can do in advance, the better off you'll know about like how serious are they about like all of these 17 different thousand things that they want. I mean, putting together a job ad for an organization can be a political exercise from, all of these different people who are asking for all, and this is true of academic jobs too, right? Everybody wants what they want. And, then they end up hiring somebody you're like, what? What are some reasons to do or not do a postdoc? Well, that's a good question. A good reason to do a postdoc is if you need the income and that is what's available to you. Okay. A good reason to do a postdoc is if you really want to do the work. I mean, hopefully you really want to do the work, right? If there's specific skills that you could learn from that PI or in that lab, right? If you want that particular experience, that's a great reason to do postdoc. If you think that a postdoc is required for your long-term career, make sure you check that that's true. A postdoc is rarely required, but there's often a sense in academia and the life science, biomedical fields, that it's just like what you do after a PhD. And so people can get a sense, even though nobody says it outright, people can get a sense you have to do a postdoc, but that's not true. Usually, it's not true. There are other, and a postdoc is not just in an academic field or in an academic lab with a PI at a university. There are other types of postdocs in other places. I don't know how, they're maybe a little more common in the US, but there's like industry postdocs, and you can do short-term kind of postdoc-like contracts through organizations like MyTax, or you can do like a 4-month internship. Those are great too. So I would say whatever you do, just make sure you're doing it strategically. And like I said, if you need a job and you need a job, hopefully it's, it's going to work for you in more than just that way. The postdoc is the same thing, but don't think, because it's probably not true, please don't think you need one, because you probably don't. I mean, I could say all the bad things about postdocs, but I don't want to kind of belabor the point. But if you're not aiming for an academic career, I would kind of plan to not postdoc. And if you are aiming for an academic career, I would postdoc for only a couple of years and not too much. Does that line up with the folks in the room who might know a little better than I do? What y'all think?
I think being strategic is the best piece of advice there. If you know where you want to go and you kind of speak to the postdocs who are ahead of you, or speak to the person where you want to end up, institution where you want to end up working. I mean, network ahead, right? I mean, That would make sense. And not being passive, which is another thing that you say, just not to be passive in this process, but be active in this process. There's a question from Chelsea.
Do you know any good LinkedIn resources or crash courses? Well, there's a super good one now that the University of Toronto paid to have all their alumni access. So I don't know how widely available it is, but it's really impressive. And it's by the LinkedIn guys. But so you can certainly pay for something like that if your university alumni office doesn't make it available. But there's a ton of information online, including on LinkedIn itself, about how to make a LinkedIn profile. The main things are, let's see, you want to have your name in, I have made the strategic choice to put comma PhD after my last name. So on LinkedIn, it says Jennifer Polk, comma PhD. That is a strategic choice. You can make that choice or not, depending on how you think your audience is going to react to that. So you have your title, then you have a headline, and your headline it's probably not going to be like seeking opportunities. It's probably not going to be PhD student. It's going to be more reflective of the type of work you want to get into. Does that make sense? Your headline is going to be more reflective of the type of work you want to get into. You can change your headline at any time. It doesn't have to be a job title that you want to do. And you can Google how to write a good LinkedIn headline. So there's your name, there's your headline, then profile picture. We already talked, right? Have a profile picture, right? Heads, shoulders, relatively closely cropped, smiling, front facing, lighting. That's all good. Make sure it's up to date. Make sure it's up to date so your experience is correct. I think that if your LinkedIn looks really different from a resume that you submit to a job and the recruiter is checking both, that can be a red flag for them. So make sure that you're saying the dates match up, basically, right? So make sure your dates line up. LinkedIn wants you to reach all-star status. So they want you to add a million different things to your profile. You don't have to. You don't have to. You have the opportunity to do so if you discover that LinkedIn is a great recruitment tool in your industry or the target fields. But that's not the case in a lot of fields. So it might not be a great use of your time to go overboard in terms of filling in all of the things on LinkedIn. But I would say headline, name, picture, make sure it's accurate and up to date. And then you can, if you want, you don't have to, but you can write, I think they call it your summary section or your profile section. And that's your opportunity to share some of the language in terms of your mission. And then the main thing about LinkedIn, I think, is that it's a wonderful search tool. It's a wonderful search tool. So you can learn a ton about individuals and companies. MUN has a school page, they'll call it. You can search for alumni using the MUN page on LinkedIn. There's an alumni search tool right there. I mean, there's so many different ways you can use LinkedIn as a search. I am going on and on and on. So I don't know of any kind of free crash courses, although I'm sure they exist. But there's a ton of stuff. So I would just figure out what do you really need? What do you really need? And then go and seek that information. There's just free content everywhere. I've written blog posts about LinkedIn, right? So there's tons of opportunities. Got to run. Great. Schedule time for these career focused activities. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And a shout out to LinkedIn. Oh yeah. Through your university, you probably have access to LinkedIn Learning. That's great. It's great for some fields. It's kind of doesn't have anything for others. So, if there's nothing for you, it's not you, it's them. But if you're at all aiming for anything really techy in the tech world or kind of super kind of business world, there's good resources there. Yeah, and LinkedIn has job alerts. Yep. Yeah, it's great. Thank you all very much. Anything else?
Looks like it's not so much activity in the chat right now. Jen, thank you so much. Thanks for bringing it down to a real personal level of what students should be thinking of now. We absolutely encourage that because we want our students to be as successful and happy and placed where they want to be as possible. Got your Twitter feed there. I hope that everyone starts following you and checking out your blog and reading university affairs and just sort of reaching out beyond the day-to-day, because I think that would be a key to success, and maybe even getting a little bit more out of what the university has to offer as well.
Yeah. And just to say, I didn't say this earlier, last plug, there are a ton of folks working on campus that have graduate degrees that aren't professors, and you can chat with them too. Because if you're interested at all in working in higher ed, they can tell you all about that. And those folks have networks that extend beyond the campus. So, you as a grad student, that is a connection that you have. I'm currently pursuing a doctorate at MUN. You're a staff member here. Can we have a 20-minute phone call?
And I can tell you all who those people are.
Great. Yeah, awesome.
Right on. Awesome. I'm really happy. Hopefully students got a lot out of that, and hopefully the students who watch the recording later will get more out of that. So that's great. Thank you, Jen, so much. Such a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.